Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back, way back about 2000 years, into the dusty, noisy, vibrant heart of the Roman Empire. Picture it, the chaotic symphony of a Roman city's street at dusk. The sharp tang of garum, the ever-present fish sauce mingling with the sweet, heavy scent of cheap wine spilled on cobblestones. The distant roar of the crowd from the amphitheatre, the nearer shouts of vendors still trying to offload their wares, the rumble of wooden cartwheels on pavement. It's a sensory explosion, a place teeming with life but also with peril. You're about to be born into this world, small and vulnerable, a tiny life starting in a very big, very dangerous place. And let's be honest, for a newborn stray in ancient Rome, your odds of making it past sunrise tomorrow are, statistically speaking, roughly zero. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know down in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is right now as you drift off. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first breath is a gasp, sharp and cold, pulling the damp, heavy air of a Roman alleyway into tiny, undeveloped lungs. You're small, impossibly small, a shivering scrap of fur nestled amongst damp straw and refuse. The world outside is a blurry, terrifying place of looming shapes and echoing sounds. You can feel the frantic warmth of your siblings huddled close, the rhythmic press of your mother's side, but mostly you feel the biting chill seeping up from the cold ground. This isn't some cozy cat bed in a villa garden. This is a narrow space between two towering brick walls, smelling of sewage, rot, and the metallic tang of decay. Survival isn't a concept you grasp yet, but the raw instinct is there, burning deep within your small frame. You push blindly, seeking warmth, seeking milk. The world is reduced to instinct, the urgent need to feed, the desperate need for heat, the primal fear of being cold, of being alone. Each tiny cry you utter is swallowed almost instantly by the indifferent clamour of the city outside your brick cocoon. You are insignificant, easily overlooked, and that is both your greatest vulnerability and perhaps your only protection. Days blur into a cycle of feeding, sleeping, and shivering. The sounds outside become a constant low thrum. Shouts, laughter, arguments, the rhythmic clang of hammers, the distant bleating of sheep being driven through the streets. Sometimes the ground trembles as heavy carts laden with goods rumble past, sending vibrations up through the very earth beneath you. It's loud, relentlessly loud. It's amazing. Anything gets any sleep around here, frankly. Must have been the Roman equivalent of earplugs, probably made of wax or something equally delightful. As your eyes begin to flutter open, the blurry world gains edges, colours. The harsh Roman sun, when it manages to pierce the narrow canyon of the alley, is blinding. Shapes resolve into the rough texture of brick, the dark, slick gleam of discarded waste, the outline of your mother's tired form. You take your first tentative, wobbly steps. The ground is rough, uneven, treacherous. A stray piece of broken pottery, a sharp stone, a patch of slippery filth, each is a potential disaster for your unsure paws. Exploration is driven by curiosity, yes, but mostly by hunger. Your mother is doing her best, but there isn't much bounty to be had in this desolate corner. You begin to venture further, still wobbly, still terrified, but pushed by the need to find something, anything else. You learn to navigate the vertical world of drain pipes and low ledges, a tiny adventurer in a concrete jungle built for giants. You squeeze through cracks in walls, dart under looming structures, always staying close to the ground, always ready to freeze or flee. The smells, the smells of Rome are overwhelming, even more so at ground level. The rich, fermented stink of public latrines, often fascinatingly social places, apparently a mainstream historical fact you learn simply by avoiding the sweet rot of discarded fruit, the pungent odour of sweating bodies packed together, the metallic tang of blood from a butcher's stall, the earthy smell of damp earth and stone, and under everything, the ever-present salty, fishy note of garum. Your tiny nose is your primary map, guiding you through this olfactory labyrinth. One day, a smell is different. It's not the usual decay or the fear-inducing musk of a large dog. This smell is warmer, more complex. It has hints of roasted grain, something yeasty and sweet, and another note, rich and savoury like cooked meat, but perhaps not quite. It's enticing, a siren call to a hungry belly. Drawn by this novel scent, you follow, darting across a wider, slightly less terrifying space, maybe a small courtyard or a break in the buildings. You slip through a narrow gap between a heavy wooden door and its frame into a different kind of space entirely. You've found yourself at the back of a building, one of many packed together in a multi-story structure. Ah, the insula. These were the Roman equivalent of apartment buildings, sometimes 6 or 7 stories high, crammed together in dense urban areas. A mainstream historical fact. While the wealthy lived in sprawling single-story domus with private courtyards, the vast majority of Romans lived in these insula, often in cramped, dark, and not always structurally sound conditions, especially on the upper floors. This building, though, feels substantial. You're on the ground floor. The air here is different. Warmer for one, and the smells intensify. That enticing aroma is stronger now, mixed with the damp earth of a small enclosed yard, maybe some discarded straw and the distinct odour of fermentation. You creep around a stack of discarded amphorae to beer, those large clay pots used for transporting wine, oil, or garum. They're cool to the touch, slightly damp. You find a small dark recess behind them, a temporary sanctuary. From your hiding spot, you can hear sounds from the other side of a wall, muffled voices, laughter, a clinking noise. The enticing smell seems to be coming from that direction. Curiosity, overriding caution, pushes you forward. You find a small crack near the base of the wall, or maybe a loosely fitting stone, and peer through. It's a scene of controlled chaos. Light spills from oil lamps, flickering and warm. Large shapes, human legs, move constantly. There are tables, low to the ground from your perspective, scattered around a floor that's not clean, not by a long shot. It's sticky in places, littered with dropped food scraps, soaked with liquid. This is clearly a place where food and drink are consumed. A taberna. Historians still argue whether every single taberna was essentially a pub, a restaurant, or just a shop that happened to sell something consumable on the spot. From your perspective, it's just noisy and full of potential smells. It seems to be a bustling place, frequented by many different types of people, judging by the variety of sandal straps and hem lengths you glimpse at ankle height. You watch, a tiny hidden observer. The humans are loud, boisterous, sometimes clumsy. They drop things, little things. Crumbs of bread, maybe a bit of cheese, even small pieces of meat that fall unnoticed from hands or tables. Your stomach gives a desperate little lurch. This place has food. The thought of leaving your hiding spot is terrifying. There are so many feet, so large and quick. One wrong step and you'd be flattened into a furry Roman pancake. Not exactly the glorious fate you dream of if kittens dream, but the hunger is a sharper fear. You edge out from behind the amphorae, low to the ground, moving with the innate stealth of your kind, even undeveloped. The smells hit you fully now. The sharp tang of cheap wine, Posca maybe, a mix of vinegar and water, surprisingly popular, a quirky tidbit about Roman hydration habits, the aroma of roasted chickpeas, the oily smell of fried dough, and under it all, that same enticing mix. Your whiskers twitch, trying to make sense of the overload. You see a fallen crumb of bread near a table. It looks impossibly large and delicious. You dart forward, snatch it up, and retreat just as a pair of heavy-soled boots stamp down nearby. Your heart hammers against your tiny ribs. That was close, maybe too close. You chew the dry, hard bread, and it is the most wonderful thing you have ever tasted. This is it. This chaotic, noisy, slightly terrifying place with its giant, clumsy inhabitants and its floor littered with accidental treasures. This might be a place you can survive. You find a new hiding spot, further inside near the warmth radiating from a small brazier used for cooking or heating. It's under a rickety wooden bench, hidden from view by trailing cloaks and discarded bags. The floor here is slightly cleaner, or at least less liquid-soaked. You curl up, exhausted by the terrifying journey and the sensory onslaught, but for the first time in your short life, feeling a fragile sense of possibility. The sounds of the tavern fade into a dull roar. The smells become a comforting background. You're inside, you are warm. For now, that is enough. The world from down here is a forest of legs. Giant, clumsy, unpredictable legs encased in tunics or cloaks, ending in dusty, sometimes surprisingly ornate sandals. Each footstep is a potential earthquake, a thunderclap inches from your tiny head. The tavern floor, your entire known universe for now, is a battlefield of dropped crumbs, spilled liquids, and constant, terrifying motion. You're a tiny mouse navigating a dance floor during a particularly chaotic cena. That's dinner, by the way, often the main meal for Romans, a mainstream historical fact you learn because it involves dropping things. You spend most of your time flattened against the grimy floorboards or tucked tight against the rough stone walls, your heart hammering a frantic rhythm against your ribs, waiting for the giants to pass. The smells that drew you in now flood your senses with overwhelming detail. The sharp alcoholic tang of wine, the sour notes of vinegar, the rich, greasy aroma of cooking oil, the comforting smell of baked bread, and that peculiar, savoury, slightly gamey scent that might be pork or some other roasted meat. There's also the ever-present, slightly unsettling smell of spilled drinks soaking into the floorboards, a mix of fermentation and something vaguely sweet and sticky. You learn quickly that some smells are good food, some are neutral but interesting, most liquids, though you avoid the obviously acidic ones, and some are just plain bad, the lingering scent of, well, accidents, human or otherwise. Survival is a continuous cycle of watching, waiting, and seizing fleeting opportunities. You learn the routes the tavern workers take, where they walk the most, where they are likely to drop things. You watch the patrons too. The ones who are loud and boisterous are the most dangerous. Their movements are erratic, their feet less predictable. The quieter ones, slumped over their drinks, are safer, though they drop less food. You become an expert in the subtle shift of weight that signals a foot is about to move, the tiny flick of a hand that might send a crumb tumbling. Scavenging is a high-stakes game. You spot a piece of dropped bread, maybe near the edge of a sandal. Your stomach aches with hunger. Every instinct screams danger, but the primal need for food is stronger. You dart out, a blur of fur, snatch the prize and retreat in a fraction of a second, disappearing under a bench or behind a strategically placed amphora. It's exhilarating and terrifying all at once. The bread is dry, hard, nothing like the warm, rich milk you knew before, but its substance. It fills a tiny corner of the gnawing emptiness inside you. You learn to eat quickly, gulping down the morsels before another foot descends or a hungry rat. Yes, they are definitely here and they are competition, so can snatch it away. The types of food you find tell a story about what's being served here. Besides bread, you find scattered chickpeas, roasted and slightly hard, bits of oily dough from scrubletta, a Roman fried pastry often eaten for breakfast, a quirky tidbit about Roman meals, sometimes even small scraps of meat that have been dropped. The taste of these things is intense, sometimes overwhelming for your tiny palate, but they are life itself. You chew carefully, wary of sharp edges or bits too tough to swallow. Learning the rhythm of the taberna is key. The early morning is quiet, the air cool and damp, smelling of stale wine and sleeping humans. This is when the workers begin to stir, sweeping the floor, a terrifying activity involving large, fast-moving brooms, bringing in supplies. Midday brings a rush of customers, labourers seeking a quick meal, travellers passing through. This is prime scavenging time, but also the most dangerous. The evening is the loudest, most chaotic period, with laughter, shouting, singing, often off-key, proving some things never change, and significantly more spillage. Late night, things quiet down again, the patrons stumbling out into the Roman darkness, leaving the workers to clean up the worst of the mess. This is when you can sometimes venture out for slightly longer periods, exploring the nooks and crannies left behind. You find a few semi-permanent hiding spots, the space under the bench, yes, but also behind a large, heavy barrel used for storage, where the smell of wine is strong but provides a decent cover. A small gap in the wall near the brazier offers warmth on cool nights, though it means being close to potential burns. You learn which spots are safest during the busy times and which are best for quiet exploration. Observation becomes second nature. You study the humans, their hands, how they hold cups, how they tear bread, their voices, the different tones for anger, laughter, sadness. You start to associate certain smells with certain activities, the sharp smell of wine being poured, the smoky smell when food is cooking on the brazier. You even learn a basic form of non-verbal communication from them, the way they wave their arms when arguing, the slump of their shoulders when tired. It's like trying to understand an alien species, but your survival depends on it. A mainstream historical fact. Roman taverns like this were incredibly common, found on almost every street corner in busy urban areas. They served a vital function as social hubs, places to eat and drink affordably, and sometimes even offered basic lodging on upper floors, though likely not very comfortable. They were the fast food joints and pubs of the ancient world. catering to the needs of the vast majority of the Roman population who didn't have kitchens in their cramped, insular apartments. Historians still argue whether all tavernae were licensed by the state or if many operated more informally, perhaps paying taxes but without strict permits. From your perspective, license or no license, this place is a chaotic food-dropping foot traffic nightmare, but it's your chaotic food-dropping foot traffic nightmare now. You learn to avoid the tavern owner. He's a large man, often shouting, sometimes kicking at things, or people, you've seen that too. He seems to have a particular dislike for anything small and furry, though you haven't figured out if it's specifically you or just vermin in general. You freeze whenever he's near, making yourself as small and invisible as possible. Sometimes, in the quieter moments, you see him or one of the workers toss a bone or a scrap of gristle into a corner for something. You don't know what, maybe another animal? You haven't seen any others like you here yet. The idea of a thrown scrap is tantalizing, but you're too small, too timid, too low on the food chain to compete for something like that. Not yet anyway. Your world is built on scavenging the ignored, the accidental bounty. One evening you're tucked under a table, trying to be invisible as a group of men talk loudly and play dice. They're drinking heavily, and drops of wine splash onto the floor near you. It smells strongly, sweet and fermented. Not food, but liquid. Your mouth is dry from eating stale bread. You cautiously lap at a small puddle. It's sharp, slightly sweet, and makes your tiny tongue tingle. Not pleasant like milk, but interesting. A different kind of sustenance. You realize that survival here isn't just about food, it's about using whatever the chaotic human world throws at you. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from earlier? Okay, maybe not that far back, but the principle is the same, adapting to whatever bizarre reality you find yourself in. You watch the dice game. They were using small bone dice, shaking them in a cup and throwing them onto the table. Sometimes a die rolls off the edge. Most land on the floor and are retrieved. But once, just once, a die rolls under the table, bounces, and comes to rest near your hiding spot. It's a tiny cube of bone, marked with dots. You watch it, fascinated. It's not food, not water, but it's small and throwable, like a particularly hard, non-edible piece of kibble. A silly thought, I know, but in your tiny world everything is either food, shelter, or a threat. This little bone cube is none of those things, just an object. Maybe you could bat it around when nobody is looking. A fleeting thought of playfulness, quickly suppressed by the ever-present need for vigilance. This is not a place for games. You're constantly learning. You learn that when certain sounds happen, like the scrape of a stool on the floor, it usually means a human is getting up, potentially creating a temporary zone of safety. You learn which cracks in the wall are wide enough to squeeze through and which are dead ends. You learn the difference between the heavy, purposeful tread of a worker and the shuffling, unsteady steps of a drunk patron. This knowledge is your armour. The nights are still cold, but less so than the alley. The residual warmth from the brazier, the proximity of human bodies, even if they are massive and terrifying, and the shelter of the building offer a degree of comfort you didn't have before. You still shiver sometimes, especially towards dawn, but it's a less desperate, bone-deep cold. You find a spot under the main counter, where discarded cloths and empty amphorae create a snug den. It smells strongly of wine and spilled dregs, but it's relatively quiet and hidden. This becomes your primary sanctuary. Curled in your chosen spot, listening to the fading sounds of the tavern, the final clatter of pots, the murmur of voices as the workers prepare to sleep, the distant sounds of the Roman night filtering in, you feel a fragile sense of belonging. It's a dangerous, unpredictable home, but it is a home. You've survived your first few days in this new world, adapting to its chaos, learning its secrets. You close your eyes, the scent of stale wine and opportunity filling your tiny lungs. Life settles into a rhythm, though settles feels too calm a word for the constant thrum of danger and the frantic scramble for sustenance. Your days and nights are marked by the tavern's pulse, the surge of noise and traffic during peak hours, the quiet lull of the early morning, the boisterous chaos of evening. You've mapped the safest routes, the quickest escapes. The space under the counter, reeking agreeably of spilled wine and stale bread, remains your primary sanctuary. It's a cramped little fort in a very big, very scary world. You start to distinguish individual humans. There's the tavern owner, still a looming, shouting figure whose heavy tread sends vibrations through the floorboards long before he appears. He's the sun around which the tavern revolves, sometimes a source of terrifying wrath, other times merely a large, indifferent obstacle. Then there's a younger woman, maybe a slave or a free worker, whose movements are quicker, more efficient. She sometimes hums tunelessly as she works, and her feet, though just as large from your perspective, seem slightly less likely to stomp on you than the owners. There's an older man, too, who spends a lot of time sweeping. His broom is a weapon of mass destruction, but he moves slowly, predictably. You learn to fear the broom's bristles more than his feet. Your primary diet remains crumbs and spills. Dry bread is a staple, sometimes softened by a drop of spilled liquid. Chickpeas roll under tables, a rare crunchy treat. You even manage to gnaw on tiny splinters of dropped cheese, though it's potent stuff for a small creature. Finding food is less random now. You anticipate where spills are likely to occur, near the main counter where drinks are served, under the tables where messy eaters gather. It's still a high-stakes lottery, but you're getting better at predicting the winning numbers. But you are not alone in this low-level ecosystem. The rats are here. You smell them sometimes, a musky, unending scent. You see their shadows darting in the periphery, larger and faster than you. They are bold, unafraid of the humans, sometimes even scampering across open floor spaces, snatching larger scraps than you could ever hope to carry. They are competition, yes, but more than that, they are a terrifying reminder of your vulnerability. You are small, but they are hot rats. You freeze if you sense one near, your fur bristling, your tiny body pressed flat against the floor, hoping their eyes don't register your presence. One of your more successful scavenging spots is near the brazier, a charcoal-fueled grill used for cooking. Dropped bits of meat or greasy fat are common here, though the heat is a constant danger. The smell of sizzling meat is intoxicating, a stark contrast to the dry bread, and worth the calculated risk. You learn to approach only when the heat is less intense, during the cooler parts of the day, or after the fire has died down for the night. These meaty scraps are gold, rich, flavourful, and providing more sustenance than a pile of crumbs. Through the tavern doorway you get glimpses of the world outside. Feet pass by on the street, hobnailed boots of soldiers, elegant sandals of the wealthy, worn soles of labourers. Sounds drift in, the rattle of carts on cobblestones, the hawking of street vendors, the distant murmur of the forum. You see the edge of buildings, the bottom of carts. It's a vast, noisy, complex world that feels 1,000,000 miles away from your safe, dark corner under the counter. It makes you appreciate the relative shelter this chaotic place offers, even with its dangers. A mainstream historical fact. Roman taverns often had specific names, sometimes painted on signs above the entrance, depicting things like animals, pigs, elephants, objects, a shield, a pot, or even mythical figures. These names served as visual identifiers for a largely illiterate population. So this place might not just be the tavern, but maybe the sign of the elephant, or the pot of plenty. Catchy, right? Beats trying to remember a street number when you can't read. Historians still argue whether the quality of food and drink in Roman taverns varied significantly between establishments, or if there was a general standard, often perceived as low. From your perspective, any dropped scrap is gourmet dining compared to starving, so who are we to judge? Though you do notice some scraps taste funkier than others. Maybe that's the low standard they're talking about. Probably shouldn't dwell on that. Sometimes a patron will drop something truly baffling. One man, slumped over his drink, dropped a small, smooth stone. Not food, not a dice like before, just a stone. He didn't seem to notice. You nudged it with your nose. Cold, hard, useless. Humans are weird. They carry around and drop the strangest things. You remember that brief, strange moment of curiosity about the bone dice. This is just another example of the peculiar artifacts of the giant world. It's like finding a lost earring in a modern bar. You just stare at it and wonder about the life it came from. Another quirky tidbit. Romans didn't typically drink wine straight like we often do today. They almost always diluted it with water, sometimes adding spices or even honey. Drinking undiluted wine was often seen as barbaric or the mark of a drunkard. The spilled wine you lap up on the floor is probably already mixed, which is probably good for your tiny liver. Though honestly, you're just happy it's liquid and tastes slightly interesting. You learn the sounds of cleaning. The splash of water, hopefully clean water, though given the state of the floor you have your doubts. Being slopped onto the floor, the scrape of the broom, the rattle of pots being stacked. These are signals to retreat deep into your hiding spot, becoming one with the shadows until the tide of cleaning passes. It's terrifying. The sudden flood of water, the giant broom strokes that could crush you instantly. But afterwards, the floor is slightly less sticky, the air a little clearer, before the next wave of patrons undoes all the effort. You spend significant time simply observing the humans, trying to decipher their behaviour patterns. You notice they laugh when the dice fall a certain way, groan when they don't. They get louder after drinking more. They argue about things you don't understand, pointing fingers and gesticulating wildly. It's a constant baffling performance, and you are a tiny, furry theatre critic reviewing the worst play in the world, but at least it has snacks sometimes. Despite the constant danger, you begin to feel marginally more secure. You have a place to hide, you know where the food might be, and you recognise the main players in this daily drama. The gnawing hunger is still there, always, but it is sometimes temporarily sated. The fear is a constant companion, but it is tempered by growing familiarity. You're a survivor, adapting to the bizarre reality of Roman tavern life, one dropped crumb, one spilled drop of wine, one terrifying rat encounter at a time. Curled up in your den under the counter, you can hear the muffled sounds of the tavern at rest, the soft snores of a worker sleeping on a mat nearby, the creak of the building settling, the distant calls from the Roman night. You close your eyes, the smells of stale wine, wood smoke, and your own nervous scent filling the air. Tomorrow the rhythm begins again. The quiet of the night doesn't last forever. As the first hints of grey light seep under the door and through the cracks in the shutters, the tavern begins to stir. There's the scraping of stools, the clatter of pottery, the low murmuring of the owner or workers getting ready. You uncurl stiffly from your safe spot, stretching tiny limbs. The gnawing in your belly is back, a constant reminder that survival isn't earned just once, but fought for every single moment. You need to expand your hunting grounds. The area under the counter is good for easy wins, forgotten crumbs, unfortunate spills, but it's picked clean quickly. You eye the more open spaces, the areas closer to where food is prepared and served. The tables themselves are risky territory. They are giant, unstable mountains topped with potential treasures. But getting onto them is a feat of climbing, and traversing them means being exposed to the giant hands and swinging arms of the humans. It's a high-reward, high-danger proposition. You learn to time your ascents. When a table is empty, perhaps just wiped down and waiting for the next wave of patrons, you make your move. It involves a frantic scrabble up a table leg, tiny claws finding purchase on rough wood. Once on top, it's a dizzying landscape. The wood grain feels enormous under your paws. You sniff around, hoping for a forgotten crumb of bread, a drop of gravy, or even a tiny piece of meat overlooked during cleaning. Sometimes you find a discarded olive pit, which isn't food, but at least it's something to investigate, rolling it around with your nose before deciding it's useless. The biggest risk on the tables is the sudden return of a human. They appear without warning, their faces looming like giants, their hands slamming down pottery or wiping surfaces with surprising speed. You have to be constantly alert, ready to freeze or leap off the edge with no hesitation, even if it means a slightly jarring landing. You remember those first terrifying moments of exposure in the main room? This is like that, but amplified, miniaturized onto a tabletop battlefield. It feels like playing a tiny game of the floor is lava, but the lava is actual giant humans. Beyond the tables, you venture towards the back of the tavern, towards the kitchen area. Even from a distance, the smells are incredible. Rich, complex aromas of simmering stews, roasting meat, and baking bread. This is the source of the best scraps, but it's also the most dangerous. This is where the humans spend most of their time, where the heat from the ovens and braziers is most intense, and where sharp knives and heavy pots are constantly in motion. It's the heart of the danger zone. Getting close requires extreme caution. You slink along the edges of the room, using shadows and discarded sacks as cover. You watch the frantic movements of the workers, timing your dashes between obstacles. A drop bit of cooked meat here, a splash of sauce there. These are prizes worth risking much for. You learn that fallen vegetables, like onions or beans, are less appealing but still edible in a pinch. Finding a whole untouched scrap of seasoned meat is like hitting the jackpot. It's a moment of pure, intense satisfaction before you snatch it and retreat back to safety to devour it. Historians still argue whether the quality of ingredients used in Roman taverns was consistently poor, or if some establishments offered relatively decent fare, perhaps depending on their clientele or location. From your perspective, a rat might find some of this questionable, but you're not picky. If it smells remotely like food and isn't moving under its own power, it's on the menu. One mainstream historical fact about these places: Roman taverns, known as corpinae, popinae, or thermopolia, often served hot food and drinks, much like ancient fast food joints. They catered primarily to the working class, travellers, and those without cooking facilities in their own homes. They weren't fancy restaurants. Think more like a bustling, slightly greasy roadside diner where the clientele was a bit rough around the edges and the hygiene was aspirational. This explains the constant parade of hungry people and the ready availability of hot food scraps. A quirky tidbit: Roman cooks sometimes used a fermented fish sauce called garum in nearly everything. It was made from fish guts left to ferment in the sun with salt. It had a strong, pungent smell, but was a staple flavouring agent. If you find a piece of meat or a bit of sauce that tastes particularly challenging, let's just say garum might be the culprit. It's the ancient equivalent of putting sriracha on everything, but with a fishy fermented twist. Your tiny nose is probably very familiar with that distinctive aroma by now, though you might not know why it smells like that. You also discover food sources that are less obvious. Under the benches where patrons sit, you might find forgotten food tucked away, or maybe dropped dates or figs. Near the water supply, though dangerous due to splashes and slippery surfaces, there might be remnants of spilled drinks or wash-ins. Even near the latrine, if the tavern has one, which you wisely avoid unless absolutely desperate, there might be something less than ideal, though your instincts scream nope at that particular possibility. You're a survivor, not a garbage disposal unit, mostly. The risks aren't just about being stepped on or crushed. You learn that standing too long near the hot brazier can singe your whiskers. Not a fun experience like accidentally touching a hot stovetop, but for your face. You also learn that some scraps, while initially promising, taste foul or make your tiny stomach churn. Identifying what is actually edible and what is just garbage is a skill honed through trial and error, mostly involving tentative sniffs and tiny licks. It's a culinary adventure, if your idea of adventure involves potential poisoning and the constant threat of doom. Sometimes the risks are interaction-based. A human might spot you. Usually they just ignore you or shoo you away with a foot or a shouted word. But occasionally one might be quicker, or deliberately try to kick or step on you. These moments are terrifying, sending you scrambling for cover with your heart pounding against your ribs. It reinforces the understanding that while the tavern provides resources, the humans are unpredictable forces of nature. They can be benign, indifferent, or actively hostile, all within the space of a few heartbeats. You are becoming more efficient, though. Your movements are quicker, more decisive, and you spend less time exploring blindly and more time targeting likely spots. You can differentiate the sound of the owner's heavy footfall from a customer's lighter step, the rattling cart outside from someone entering the tavern. These sounds are clues, warnings, opportunities. Your senses are your shield and sword in this concrete jungle. Curled up again, perhaps behind a stack of amphorae near the kitchen, the scent of stale food and wood smoke heavy in the air, you digest your meagre findings. You survived another day, another cycle of hunger, risk, and temporary relief. The world outside the tavern is a mystery. The world within is a constant challenge. But you are learning its rules. One cautious step, one snatched crumb, one narrow escape at a time. The rhythm of the tavern is your heartbeat now. As the light strengthens and the tavern truly awakens, your world expands from just darkness and immediate danger to a bustling, cacophonous theatre of human life. You are no longer just avoiding obstacles, you're observing the creatures who are the obstacles, who are the source of the food, the noise, the potential danger, and yes, sometimes, maybe, just maybe something else. You learn to differentiate their footsteps, the heavy, purposeful treaded of the tavern owner or his main helpers, versus the shuffling, sometimes unsteady steps of the patrons. You start to understand that these giants move with purpose, albeit sometimes a slightly wobbly, wine-fueled purpose. You spend hours observing from safe vantage points, under benches, behind amphorae, high up on a dusty shelf if you can manage the climb. From these perches, the humans seem even more immense, like towering, talking mountains. You watch their faces, trying to decipher their strange expressions, their booming laughs, their sudden sharp shouts. They gesticulate wildly with their hands, sometimes slamming them down on tables with a force that makes you jump even from a distance. It's like watching a play you don't understand, filled with dramatic moments and confusing dialogue. Their interactions are fascinatingly complex. They gather in small groups, leaning close to talk in low voices, or shouting across the room to someone else. They pass objects between themselves, pottery cups, coins that gleam enticingly, dice for their games. Sometimes they bow embrace, slapping backs or linking arms. Other times, their faces contort into frowns, their voices rise, and their hands become fists. These are the moments you instinctively tense, ready to bolt, because angry humans are unpredictable and often careless about what their feet might do. You start to associate certain sounds and smells with activities. The clinking of pottery means drinks are being served. The rhythmic thudding is likely someone chopping food in the kitchen. The splash and slosh means someone is refilling a water basin, or maybe spilling something glorious that you might investigate later. And the smells. Beyond the cooking food, there's the sharp tang of wine, the sour scent of spilled beer, the earthy smell of feet, the sometimes sweet, sometimes cloying scent of perfumes or oils they rub on themselves. It's an olfactive overload compared to the simple smells of your first den. One mainstream historical fact you're living amongst. Roman taverns were central to the social lives of many non-elite Romans. They were places to eat, drink, socialize, gamble, and even conduct business. For many, especially those living in crowded apartments without cooking facilities, they were essential spots for hot meals and company. You see this constantly. People coming in hungry, tired from work, looking for a place to sit, eat, and forget the day for a while. They are the lifeblood of your little world, even if they are oblivious to your constant silent presence. Observing them gamble is particularly captivating. They gather around a table, hands shaking dice from a cup onto the surface. There are murmurs, exclamations of triumph or frustration. Sometimes the stakes seem high. You see arguments break out over disputed throws or lost coins. It looks utterly pointless to you, but it occupies a significant portion of their time and energy. You just see shiny little discs being pushed around, accompanied by a lot of shouting. Humans, you conclude, are very strange. Why play games when you could be looking for food? A quirky tidbit about Roman life, often on display in places like this. Romans were quite superstitious. They had various beliefs about luck, omens, and curses. Dice games were often fraught with superstition, players invoking gods or using weighted dice to cheat. You wouldn't know the details, but you sense the tension, the way they finger small amulets, the muttered words they direct at the dice. Sometimes, if things go badly, a human might lash out blindly in frustration, perhaps kicking a stool or even, God forbid, aiming a frustrated foot vaguely in your direction if they catch a glimpse of movement they blame for their bad luck. You are, after all, still just a potential pest in their eyes. Historians still argue whether the primary function of Roman taverns was purely for consumption and socializing, or if they also served as fronts for less legal activities given their sometimes rowdy reputation and clientele. From your low-down view, you see plenty of loud talk and questionable characters, certainly enough to make you think some less than respectable things might be going on after hours, or even in plain sight under the cover of noise and wine. You wouldn't be surprised if some of these characters weren't just discussing philosophy over watered wine. You also observe the dynamic between the tavern workers and the patrons. The workers are usually busy, rushing about, cleaning, serving, managing the constant flow of people. They seem perpetually stressed, their faces grim or tired. The patrons, on the other hand, range from cheerful and loud to grumpy and demanding. You learn to recognize the owner, a portly man with a booming voice and a tendency to swat at anything small and moving with a rag. Avoiding him is a top priority. His wife, if she's around, might be slightly less terrifying, maybe even indifferent, but still a colossal, dangerous presence. The sheer volume of the human voice is something you get used to but never entirely ignore. They can shift from a low rumble to a sudden piercing shout in an instant. Laughter is particularly jarring, a sudden burst of noise that makes you freeze, though you quickly learn it usually doesn't mean danger. Drunken singing, usually off-key and mournful or aggressively cheerful, is another frequent auditory feature of your nights. It's like living inside a giant, unpredictable musical instrument that occasionally tries to step on you. You see acts of casual kindness too, though rarely directed at you. Someone might share a bit of food with a companion or help someone who stumbles. You also see acts of casual cruelty, someone shoving another, harsh words exchanged. It's a microcosm of the larger human world played out within these four walls. You are the silent, furry witness to it all, gathering data on these strange dominant beings who control access to the warm fire and the dropped crumbs. You understand that your existence here is entirely dependent on their activities, their presence, and most importantly their relative indifference or inability to catch you. Your first true encounters are often simply moments of being seen. A pair of eyes might spot you darting under a table, A foot might twitch in your direction. A low grumble might indicate your presence has been noted. But these are fleeting moments. Your speed and size are your allies. You're a shadow, a flicker of movement at the edge of their vision. They might see a mouse, or maybe just dismiss it as a trick of the light or too much wine. You haven't yet been acknowledged as you, as a feline entity worthy of specific attention. You're just part of the background noise, the scuttling things that live in the cracks and shadows of their world. And for now, that anonymity is your greatest safety. Your days and nights continue in this cycle of cautious observation and survival. You watch the humans from the shadows, still wary, still ready to flee at a moment's notice. But something subtle begins to change in your perception. It's not just about avoiding their feet anymore. It's about what their feet are near, what their hands are doing, what falls from their strange flat eating surfaces they call mensae. You've learned that many of the smells that fill the air, the truly enticing ones, come directly from these giants and the things they put into their mouths. You see them scoop up bits of things with their fingers or with little spoon-like tools, lift them to their faces, chew and swallow. It seems incredibly messy, often with small pieces breaking off or dropping. At first, these drop bits were just more obstacles on the floor, things to navigate around in the perpetual gloom. But hunger, that constant gnawing presence in your belly, sharpens your senses, making you see opportunity where before you only saw debris. You start to fixate on the scraps. A piece of bread falls, bouncing once before settling near the edge of a worn mosaic. A drop of oily liquid misses a lip and splatters onto the dusty floorboards. A small dark object, maybe an olive or a date pit, rolls under a bench. Your instincts scream caution, warning you to stay hidden, to keep your distance from the unpredictable giants. But the smell is intoxicating. It's richer, more complex than anything you find trying to hunt beetles or nibble on forgotten grain. There's a constant internal debate happening in your tiny feline brain. Is the risk of being seen, of attracting unwanted attention or a potentially fatal stomp, worth the potential reward of that delicious aroma? For a long time, the fear wins. You watch, you salivate silently, but you stay put, relying on the occasional oversight. A bit of kitchen waste left briefly unattended. A dropped crust someone doesn't bother to retrieve because it's dirty. You know, for instance, that Romans didn't have forks like you might see people use today. They ate primarily with their hands, which, let's be honest, probably contributed nicely to the floor buffet situation for someone like you. More drops equals more dinner prospects. One mainstream historical fact you're experiencing is the centrality of grain, specifically wheat in the Roman diet, usually consumed as bread or porridge. You see vast quantities of bread being brought into the tavern, round loaves, flatbreads, crumbs are everywhere. While it's not the most exciting meal compared to, say, a fat mouse, these carbohydrate fragments are a reliable source of energy. You learn which types of crumbs are most appealing, the softer inner bits, the slightly burnt edges, and you quickly realize that the sheer volume of bread consumed means a constant if sporadic supply of floor-based sustenance. Your courage grows slowly, fueled by desperation and observation. You notice that the humans, particularly when they are focused on their conversations or their games, are often oblivious to the world happening at floor level. They look at each other, they look at the ceiling, they look at their cups. Their eyes rarely scan the floor for anything smaller than a dropped coin. This is your advantage. You practice quick, low dashes from cover to cover. You learn the geometry of the tavern floor, the blind spots behind legs of tables, the shadows under shelves, the reliable pathways along the walls. The first time you intentionally go for a dropped scrap while humans are actively nearby is terrifying. Your heart hammers against your ribs. Every muscle is tensed, ready to spring away. You spot a piece of something interesting, maybe a bit of roasted meat that fell near a table of particularly loud, drunken patrons. The smell is irresistible. You creep from your hiding spot low to the ground, moving with agonizing slowness at first, then breaking into a lightning-fast dash. Grab the prize. Don't chew here. Retreat immediately back to the safety of the shadows or under a heavy bench. Eat it quickly, eyes wide, ears swiveling, listening for any shift in the human soundscape, any sign that you've been detected. It's a rush, a victory against your own fear. It's also kind of like extreme dumpster diving, but way more high stakes. You start to differentiate not just types of food, but also which humans are messier eaters or more prone to dropping things. Some are careful, others seem to treat the floor like an extension of their table. You develop favourites, like the perpetually distracted patron who always seems to lose bits of his meal, or the owner's clumsy young helper who drops more than he serves. These individuals, previously just anonymous giants, begin to take on specific characteristics in your mind linked directly to your potential for a decent meal, a quirky tidbit you pick up from observing their discarded items and general habits. Romans, despite their impressive engineering and architecture, weren't exactly champions of hygiene by modern standards, especially in public spaces like taverns. Food scraps, spilled liquids, and general refuse were often just left on the floor or swept into corners to be dealt with later, or perhaps not at all until the next basic sweep. This creates a chaotic but potentially rewarding environment for a scavenger. Let's just say if a modern health inspector walked in, they'd probably pass out from shock. Good for you though, right? More leftover opportunities. Historians still argue whether the general standard of cleanliness in lower-class Roman establishments, including taverns, was uniformly poor or varied significantly depending on the owner and the location. From your worm's eye view, let's just say it seems consistently generous with its ground-level offerings. You navigate a landscape of dropped crumbs, discarded bones, too big for you, sadly, pools of spilled wine that ferment and smell horrible, and other less identifiable organic matter. It's a rich, if sometimes disgusting buffet. This shift in perception is revolutionary for your survival. Humans are no longer just monolithic threats. They are complex beings whose activities, particularly their eating, directly impact your ability to live. They are simultaneously the greatest danger and the most significant source of sustenance. You become an expert at reading their moods from a distance. The loud, happy groups are often sloppy and distracted, leaving more food opportunities. The quiet, intense ones, like the gamblers, are usually less prone to accidental spills. You learn to time your scavenging runs, waiting for moments of peak distraction, or when a group is leaving and has just finished their meal, leaving fresh casualties on the floor. It's a strategic game of patience, speed, and reading the room. You're becoming a professional crumb critic and floor architect. The smells of the tavern become your guide. The rich, meaty aromas from the kitchen signal potential scraps of protein highly prized. The yeasty smell of fresh bread promises easy calories. The tangy smell of cheese, if it falls, a rare treat, is like liquid gold. Your world, once defined by fear and the need for darkness, is now increasingly defined by hunger and the tantalizing, frustrating proximity of food provided, inadvertently, by the very creatures you must avoid. This delicate balance, this constant assessment of risk versus reward, becomes the central calculation of your daily existence. You are no longer just hiding from the storm, you are learning to harvest its unpredictable bounty. Your life, as you know it, is a constant tightrope walk between the urgent need for sustenance and the paralyzing fear of being discovered by the giants. You've refined your scavenging technique, a lightning-fast dart from shadow to food scrap to shadow, a blur of fur and instinct. You're getting bolder, venturing further out when the tavern is busy and the noise provides cover, or when certain, predictably messy humans are present. You've learned which tables are most likely to yield rewards, which corners offer the quickest escape routes, which humans are simply too drunk or too engrossed in their dice games to notice a tiny creature on the floor. But all that cautious refinement, all that practiced invisibility can still be shattered in an instant. One afternoon the light slants sharply through the high windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stale air. The tavern is relatively quiet, just a few patrons scattered around, the low murmur of voices punctuated by the occasional clatter from the kitchen. You spot a promising crumb near a table where a single human sits, seemingly lost in thought, occasionally taking a slow sip from a cup. It looks like a piece of pulse, a thick porridge made from grain, maybe with a bit of something mixed in, very desirable. You assess the distance, the human's posture, the minimal noise level. It seems reasonably safe. You make your move, low and fast, slinking along the edge of a worn rug. Your paws make almost no sound on the packed earth floor. You reach the target, grab the crumb in your mouth, ready to spring back to cover. And then it happens. You glance up just for a second and the human's eyes are on you. Time seems to stretch and warp. Your body locks up, every muscle screaming at you to run, hide, vanish. Your heart pounds a frantic rhythm against your ribs. You're exposed, caught red-handed, or maybe red-mouthed in this case. This is it, you think. The end of your brief, precarious existence. You brace for the expected reactions, a shout, a kick, a flung object. But it doesn't come. The human doesn't move violently. Their eyes, which seemed so large and terrifying just moments ago, don't narrow in anger. They simply observe you. Their expression is calm, maybe even a little curious. It's a young human, perhaps in the awkward stage between child and adult, not one of the rough, loud labourers or stern-robed figures you've seen. Their clothes are simple, practical. Maybe they are a helper in the tavern, or perhaps the offspring of the owner tasked with minor chores. You stand frozen, the crumb still clenched in your jaw, expecting the worst. The young human slowly lowers their hand, which had been halfway to their cup. They don't smile, but their face remains soft, unthreatening. They tilt their head slightly, and then, incredibly, they speak, but not loudly, not angrily. The sound is low, a gentle murmur you can barely distinguish over the background hum of the tavern. It's just a few soft syllables, meaningless sounds to you, but the tone is not hostile. It's quiet, almost soothing. It lacks the harshness, the booming volume, the abruptness you associate with danger from these creatures. You stand there mesmerized by the unexpected lack of threat. Your instincts are screaming at you to flee, but something in the human stillness, their quiet gaze, holds you. You can still feel the panic simmering just beneath your skin, ready to erupt. But a sliver of curiosity, a novel feeling in your fear-dominated world begins to assert itself. This isn't the reaction you've come to expect. This is different. The human slowly, deliberately reaches out a hand. Your fear spikes again. This must be the moment, the grab, the swat. You tense, ready to bolt. But the hand doesn't shoot out to grab you. It moves slowly, palm slightly open towards the floor near you. And then, even more astonishingly, a tiny piece of something drops from their fingers onto the earth floor, just a little bit closer to them than the crumb you still hold. It's another piece of the porridge, maybe a little bigger than the one you snatched. This gesture confuses you. Are they trying to lure you closer? Is it a trap? But the hand retreats immediately, slowly, back to rest on the table. The human just watches you, silent now, their gaze steady but not aggressive. It's an offering, a deliberate act of sharing, not just a dropped accident. For a long moment, you and the human are locked in this silent tableau, you with your stolen crumb, them with their deliberate offering, the quiet tavern around you. It feels like a significant moment, though you have no concept of significant. You only know it's new and it goes against everything you've learned about these unpredictable, dangerous beings. One mainstream historical fact you're experiencing in this moment is that while Romans didn't typically keep cats as pampered house pets in the same way Egyptians might have or how we do today, they absolutely recognized their utility, especially in places like granaries, shops and taverns, for pest control. Cats were valued workers, not just fluffy companions. This young human might see you not just as a nuisance or a wild animal, but as a potential asset, a little hunter keeping down the rodent population that would otherwise cause damage and eat the tavern's stores. Maybe they've been instructed to encourage resident cats for this very purpose, though their methods seem surprisingly gentle for a world often lacking in gentleness. You look from the human's face to the dropped food, then back to the human. Your tiny mind is grappling with conflicting signals. Danger, safety, fear, hunger, curiosity. The offered food is tempting, so close. The human is stationary, quiet. It's a gamble. Do you take the risk? After another long pause, you make a decision. It's not a conscious, calculated choice like a human would make. It's a complex surge of instinct and need, overwhelming ingrained fear. You don't drop the crumb you have, that's a treasure too. Instead, with a burst of speed born from necessity, you dart forwards the short distance, snatch the new offering, and zip back to the edge of the rug in one fluid movement. You don't retreat all the way to your deepest hiding spot. You stop just at the boundary of the shadows, watching the human nervously. The human's expression doesn't change. They don't try to grab you. They just nod slightly, a small, almost imperceptible movement of their head. It feels like acknowledgement, like they understand your fear, your need, and maybe even your tentative trust. A quirky tidbit that might be relevant here is the Roman attitude towards children and animals. Children in Roman society often had significant freedom, especially those from lower-class families or those working in service roles. They would interact daily with animals, both domestic and wild, in a very practical, hands-on way. It wouldn't be unusual for a young person to take an interest in a stray cat or dog, perhaps out of simple curiosity or a nascent understanding of its potential usefulness. This human's gentle approach, while perhaps not typical of all Romans, fits within the realm of possibility for a young, perhaps slightly more sensitive individual navigating the harsh realities of tavern life. Historians still argue whether individual Romans commonly formed genuine emotional bonds with utility animals like cats, or if the relationship remained purely transactional, focused solely on pest control. Was there affection or just appreciation for a job done? In this moment, for you, it feels like something more than transactional. It's a moment of recognition, a tiny bridge built across the vast chasm separating your species. You quickly eat the 2 crumbs, your eyes never leaving the human. They stay seated, looking towards you intermittently, but not staring, not making sudden movements. The air in the tavern seems less charged with potential danger than usual. This interaction, brief and silent as it was, has changed something. You've seen a glimpse of a different kind of human, one who doesn't immediately react with hostility, one who sees you and responds not with a threat but with a gift. It's a confusing, revolutionary experience. It makes you wonder if maybe, just maybe, not all giants are the same. It's a tiny crack in your wall of fear, letting in the faintest sliver of possibility. That moment hangs in the air, a tiny bubble of stillness amidst the usual churn of the tavern. You ate the crumbs, yours and the offered one, quickly, nervously, but you didn't immediately bolt for the deepest darkness. You lingered at the edge of the rug, half hidden by the leg of a bench, watching the young human. They didn't pursue you. They didn't shout for someone else to come deal with the vermin. They just finished their drink slowly, their gaze drifting sometimes towards your hiding spot, sometimes towards the other patrons, sometimes into the middle distance as if lost in thought. The fear is still a tight knot in your belly, a constant companion, but it's overlaid with something new, something confusing. This human isn't like the others. They didn't react with the automatic hostility you've come to expect. They offered food, deliberately. It was a conscious choice, not just a dropped accident. This changes things, or at least it makes your tiny survival-focused brain pause and reevaluate. Over the next few days, you find yourself cautiously observing this particular human more closely. They seem to be a regular fixture, not just a transient patron. They move with a quiet efficiency, helping with small tasks, sweeping floors, wiping down tables, refilling water jugs, sometimes carrying simple plates of food. They aren't one of the loud, boisterous giants, nor one of the stern, silent ones. They exist in a calmer space. You start to notice their routine. They often take breaks in the same corner, sometimes eating a simple meal, sometimes just sitting quietly. And during these times, they occasionally look towards the places where you tend to hide, not searching aggressively, just looking. The next time you see them with food, you are ready. You don't approach, not yet, but you position yourself strategically, visible from their spot if they look, but close to cover. You watch them eat, the rhythmic motion of hand to mouth, and then, just like before, they pause, look in your general direction, and drop a small piece of their food onto the floor. Not directly at you, which would be terrifying, but nearby. An invitation, perhaps? Or just another strange, unpredictable action. Your instincts war with the memory of the previous encounter. The hunger is always present, a dull ache. The food is right there. The human is still, quiet. This time, the dash feels slightly less terrifying. You dart out, grab the offering, and retreat, though again, not all the way back to the deepest dark. You stop under a stool, chewing quickly, keeping your eyes on the human. They just return to their own meal, no fuss, no threat. This becomes a pattern, a tentative, fragile interaction repeated over several days. The young human offers food, you take it, and they don't react negatively. You still haven't allowed them to get close, not even remotely close. If they make a sudden movement, or if another human approaches their table, you vanish in an instant. The ingrained fear is too deep to be easily overcome, but the space between you feels less fraught with immediate peril. You learn to distinguish this human's scent, their sound, their particular rhythm of movement. It's a rhythm that doesn't spike your fear like the heavy footfalls of a drunk patron or the sudden shout of the tavern owner. It's a softer cadence. One mainstream historical fact is the concept of patronage and clientship in Roman society, which extended beyond just humans. While this is a very simplistic example, there was a framework in Roman culture for reciprocal relationships, even if unequal. A patron provided protection and resources, and a client offered service or loyalty. In a way, this young human is becoming a tiny patron to you, offering sustenance, and you are becoming a tiny client, offering your presence, and hopefully from the tavern's perspective, pest control. This isn't a formal arrangement, of course, but the underlying principle of mutual benefit and a form of agreement is a thread that ran through Roman social fabric. As the days turn into weeks, your confidence around this specific human grows. You start staying slightly longer in view after retrieving the food. You might groom yourself cautiously nearby, an act that would have felt suicidal just a short time ago. You even, on occasion, dare to stay out in the open while they are sitting nearby, provided they remain still and quiet. It's still a huge leap of faith, a constant battle against your survival instincts, but the rewards, consistent non-threatening food, are powerful motivators. You begin to recognize their face, their gentle eyes. You don't understand names, but in your own way you've named them quiet provider or still human. A quirky tidbit. Romans didn't have readily available processed dead cat food, obviously. Cats either hunted for themselves or were given scraps. The quality and consistency of scraps would vary wildly depending on the generosity and type of establishment. A tavern, with its constant flow of food preparation and consumption, would be a relative buffet compared to, say, a poor citizen's home. The willingness of this human to share even a small piece of their pulse or bread is a significant act from your perspective. Its valuable calories freely given, not fought for. Historians still argue whether the gentle treatment of animals in Roman society was purely practical, keeping valuable working animals healthy. Religious, certain animals were associated with deities or omens, or if it sometimes stemmed from genuine affection. Was this young human acting solely out of a practical understanding of your potential value, or was there a spark of empathy or fondness? From your low vantage point, experiencing this kindness, the distinction is blurry. You just know it feels less terrifying than everything else you've known. You haven't yet allowed them to touch you. The thought sends a jolt of primal fear through you. Touch from a giant has always meant capture or pain, but the distance between you is shrinking. You can feel the warmth radiating from their legs sometimes when you are brave enough to sit closer, just out of reach. It's a different kind of warmth than the scorching summer sun or the fleeting heat from the cooking fires. It feels safe. This relationship is a fragile new thing. It doesn't erase the danger of the tavern, the constant need for vigilance, the fear of all the other humans, but it creates a small island of predictability, a moment of respite in your otherwise harsh existence. You're still a wild creature living by your wits in a human world, but now there's one human who seems to see you, not just as a shadow or a pest, but perhaps as something else, and that in your simple feline way feels revolutionary. The quiet offerings continue, a subtle dance between your ingrained fear and growing curiosity. You watch the quiet provider, learning their movements, the shift in their weight before they drop a crumb, the angle of their head when they look towards you. It's like learning a new language, one based on stillness and small deliberate actions. The hunger is always a powerful teacher, but the absence of threat is the revelation. You start to test the boundaries yourself. Instead of snatching and vanishing, you linger for a heartbeat longer, a fraction of a second where you are fully visible before darting back. The human doesn't react, they don't lunge, they just are. So you extend the time. You might sit at the very edge of the shadow line while you eat the offering, rather than retreating fully into the dark. Your muscles are still coiled, ready for flight, but the urge to flee is momentarily overridden by the strange sense of calm this human radiates. It's a terrifying process, this unwinding of primal fear. Every cell in your body screams danger, but the consistent lack of it, the gentle sameness of this human's behavior starts to chip away at the solid block of terror. You see other humans move swiftly, stomp, yell, throw things. This one moves slowly, speaks softly if at all when near you, and only throws food. It's confusing, but in a way, pleasantly so. Then comes the day that changes everything again. The quiet provider is sitting on the floor in their usual spot, leaning against the wall. They finish eating, and instead of just dropping a piece of food and looking away, they leave a slightly larger piece on the floor and then slowly, deliberately extend a finger towards it. Not towards you, just towards the food. It's an agonizingly slow movement. Your heart pounds, every instinct screams, bolt. You freeze, poised for escape. The finger stops, perhaps a paw length away from the food. It just waits, doesn't twitch, doesn't try to grab, doesn't reach further. It's just a still, vulnerable-looking digit presented to you. This is unprecedented. You've never been this close to a human appendage without it being part of a chasing foot or a reaching hand trying to corner you. Curiosity, bolder than fear for the first time, nudges you forward. You creep towards the food, eyes locked on the finger, doesn't move. You snatch the food, chewing quickly, still watching the finger. It remains still. You take a tiny step closer to the finger itself, sniffing the air around it. It smells like the human warm skin, a faint trace of food, no acrid scent of aggression. You reach out a tentative paw and tap the fingertip, claws sheathed. It's soft and still. The human remains motionless, just watching you with those calm eyes. Emboldened, you tap it again, slightly harder. Nothing. Then you do something utterly reckless, something that goes against every survival lesson you've ever learned. You lean forward and cautiously sniff the tip of the finger. It smells safe. And then, very, very slowly, the finger moves. Not to grab you, but to gently, almost imperceptibly stroke the top of your head right between your ears. A wave of shock, then fear, then something else washes over you. It's a light pressure, rhythmic and slow. It doesn't hurt, it doesn't threaten. It feels not bad. Unfamiliar, terrifying, but not bad. You could still bolt easily, but you don't. You stand frozen, experiencing this entirely new sensation. This slow, gentle touch becomes another part of the pattern. The human never forces it. They extend the invitation, and you choose whether or not to accept. Some days the fear is too strong, and you stay away. Other days, the pull of this strange connection, this moment of non-threatening contact draws you forward. The touch is always the same, slow, light strokes, usually on your head or down your back, areas that feel less vulnerable than your belly or paws. You learn that this touch is not a prelude to capture, but an end in itself. It is given freely, without expectation of anything in return, save your presence. You start to actively seek it out, nudging your head against the waiting finger, tentatively purring for the first time near a human. It's a rusty, hesitant sound, but it seems to make the human smile. You don't know what a smile is, but their face softens, their eyes crinkle kindly, and the feeling is warm and pleasant. A mainstream historical fact. While dogs were very common as pets, guards, and working animals in ancient Rome, the status of cats is less clear-cut. They were certainly present, evidenced by mosaics and occasional mentions, but their role was perhaps more ambiguous than dogs. They were valued for pest control, particularly against rats and mice, but whether they were widely kept as affectionate companions in the same way we think of pets today is debated. This makes your relationship with the quiet provider, if it's developing into something more than just practical coexistence, potentially quite social. This gradual acceptance of touch transforms your world within the tavern. The space around the quiet provider becomes a small sanctuary. You start spending more time in their vicinity, even when they aren't actively interacting with you. You might nap under their table, or sit on a nearby stool when the tavern is quiet. The presence of this one human shifts the dynamic of the entire dangerous environment for you. A quirky tidbit. Roman taverns, known as corpinae or popinae, were bustling, often chaotic places, serving cheap wine, simple food, and sometimes offering lodging or even other, shall we say, less respectable services. They were often dark, smoky, and not particularly clean by modern standards. For a small creature like yourself, they were full of both opportunities, scraps, mice, and dangers, stomping feet, sudden violence, sticky floors. Your ability to navigate this environment and find a pocket of relative safety is impressive. Historians still argue whether the emotional capacity for interspecies bonding was as recognized or valued in Roman times as it might be today. Was the affection people showed animals purely anthropomorphic projection, a practical appreciation, or did they genuinely form emotional attachments akin to modern pet ownership? Your experience, if you could articulate it, would be a strong argument for the latter. You don't understand why this human is kind, but you understand the feeling of safety and connection they provide. This zone of comfort isn't absolute. If the tavern gets too loud, or if other rowdy patrons approach the quiet provider's area, your instincts still take over, and you disappear. But the baseline fear level is lower when they are near. You're still a wildcat living in a human world, but you're no longer entirely alone in it. You have an ally, a provider, and perhaps, just perhaps, a friend. It's a strange, fragile bond forged in the chaos of a Roman tavern, and it feels like a small miracle. The tavern is a symphony of human noise and movement, a constant, swirling current you must navigate. With the quiet provider nearby, you have an eddy, a small pocket of relative calm. But they are not always there. and even when they are, the rest of the river flows around them. You've learned to distinguish the different currents, the different types of humans that ebb and flow through these doors. There are the early morning humans, mostly slaves and workers grabbing a quick bite or a cheap cup of watered wine on their way to whatever laborious task awaits them. They are often tired, sometimes grumpy, prone to sudden, unpredictable movements, but usually too preoccupied to pay much attention to a shadow like you. They scrape benches, shuffle feet, and their voices are low murmurs or sharp, hurried exchanges. You stay hidden then, observing from beneath overturned amphorae or dusty corners. Then come the merchants, the middle-of-the-day crowd. Louder, more boisterous. Their conversations are filled with numbers, goods, destinations. They slap tables, argue over prices, their gestures broad and sometimes dangerously close to your hiding spots. They might drop more significant scraps, bits of bread, cheese rind, maybe even a rare piece of meat fat, but the risk of being stepped on or shooed away with a boot is higher. You become an expert at timing, darting out after they leave, or when their attention is fully engrossed in a shouted negotiation. The late afternoon and evening are the most chaotic. This is when the popina truly comes alive, or perhaps more accurately, descends into glorious drunken mayhem. Soldiers off duty, citizens looking for cheap entertainment, travellers seeking a place to rest and drink away the road dust. The volume rises, laughter is louder, arguments erupt more frequently. Wine flows freely, staining the already grimy floor. Food is spilled, dishes are broken, and the risk of being caught in the crossfire of some human drama is at its peak. This is when your instincts are most on edge, when every shadow seems to hold a potential threat, and the urge to flee into the safety of the night or a forgotten storeroom is strongest. It's during these rowdier times that the contrast with the quiet provider is most stark. While others shout and stumble, they remain a point of stillness, a low hum in the surrounding din. Their presence is a comfort, an anchor in the storm. You find yourself drawn towards their corner even when the tavern is full, not necessarily seeking interaction, but simply existing in their orbit. You might sit just outside the circle of light from their lamp, invisible to most, but aware of their calming presence. Sometimes other patrons notice you. A child might point, a drunken man might make a clumsy attempt to grab you, easily avoided, thankfully. Humans are so slow when they're like that. Or someone might simply peck vaguely in your direction if you get too close. You've learned to read the signs, the shifting eyes, the sudden turn of a head, the telltale wobble of someone unsteady on their feet. Most interactions with other humans are negative or neutral at best. They see you as a nuisance, a potential carrier of fleas, not untrue, you admit, it's a constant battle, or just another part of the background filth. You're not a creature to be cherished, but tolerated, or ideally ignored. It really makes you appreciate the quiet provider even more. Like finding a clean patch of floor in a Roman tavern, it's a rare and valuable thing. A mainstream historical fact. Roman taverns often served as social hubs for the lower classes and travellers, offering a stark contrast to the private dinner parties, convivia of the elite. While the wealthy dined in their homes, ordinary Romans relied on establishments like this for prepared food, drink, and company. They were lively, sometimes rowdy, and definitely not places you'd expect to find serving anything remotely resembling a balanced meal. Think more street food stand meets dive bar. Despite the chaos, there are resources here. The mice population, while kept somewhat in check by your presence, is still substantial, offering a reliable if challenging food source. Scraps fall from tables, stale bread, gnawed bones, drips of wine, which you avoid, it smells foul. The heat from the kitchen fire is a welcome relief on cold nights. It's a harsh environment, but it provides. A quirky tidbit. Romans used a fermented fish sauce called garum on almost everything. The smell was potent and distinct, and it would have permeated the air of any establishment serving food, including taverns. Imagine trying to hunt mice with the constant background aroma of extremely pungent fish sauce. It probably required a very focused nose. Historians still argue whether Roman society viewed pest control as the primary function of domestic cats, or if they were also appreciated for their companionship. Was the cat's presence in a tavern purely practical, or did some owners, like perhaps your quiet provider, form genuine bonds that went beyond rodent management? Your existence here, the subtle shift in your own feelings, suggests the latter was possible, even if not commonplace. You've learned to adapt, to find your niche. You're a ghost in the noise, a shadow in the light. You observe the humans, learning their patterns, their weaknesses, their moments of distraction. And always, you return to the quiet corner, to the one human who sees you not just as a wild creature to be endured, but perhaps, just maybe, something more. It's a precarious existence, balanced on the edge of danger and the quiet comfort of a single, extended hand. Life isn't just about finding scraps in a warm spot, it's a constant exercise in survival, a high-stakes game of dodge and weave. Every moment carries potential peril. That precarious existence I mentioned? Yeah, it's mostly the danger part you're balancing on. First, there are the boots, so many boots. Heavy leather-clad things attached to unpredictable legs, drunken legs, hurried legs, angry legs. They stomp this, they shuffle, they kick out without warning. You learn to watch the human's feet as much as their faces, anticipating a stumble, a sudden shift in weight. The floor isn't just a surface to walk on, it's a minefield, where one wrong move, one moment of inattention, could mean a crushing end. You become a master of quick retreats, flattening yourself against a wall, vanishing under a bench, or simply melting into the nearest shadow faster than a dropped coin hits the dust. It's like playing perpetual extreme hide-and-seek, except it is always death by clumsy human. Then there are the deliberate threats. Not everyone in the tavern is lost in their own world. Some see you and see an annoyance. Children emboldened by their guardians' inattention, or perhaps just bored, might try to grab you, their sticky hands reaching with terrifying speed. Other adults might view you with outright hostility, seeing you as vermin, a source of dirt or disease. A casual kick isn't the worst you might face, eh? You've seen objects thrown, heard curses hurled your way. You learn which humans to avoid entirely, recognizing the glint in their eye, the tension in their posture that signals potential aggression. The tavern owner, too, represents a different kind of threat. While he tolerates you because you keep the mice population somewhat under control, which is a constant battle, honestly, Roman taverns are basically all-you-can-eat buffets for rodents. You're a tool, not a pet. If you become too visible, too bold, or if he decides you're not doing your job well enough, his patience wears thin. His hand isn't usually gentle, and you've learned to give him a wide berth, especially when he's stressed or angry. And while you help with the mice, they are still a danger. Large rats, emboldened by the ample food sources, can be surprisingly aggressive, especially if you corner them or threaten their young. A rat bite is a nasty affair, prone to infection in this environment where cleanliness is more of a philosophical concept than a practical reality. You engage in these skirmishes out of necessity, relying on speed and instinct, but every hunt carries risk. Beyond the rodent residents, other animals pose threats. Dogs, for instance, often accompany humans into the tavern or roam the streets outside. Roman dogs weren't usually pampered lapdogs. They were working animals, guard dogs, or scavengers, often large and territorial. The smell of a dog sends a jolt of pure adrenaline through you, a primal warning. You freeze, assessing the situation, ready to bolt or disappear. Their barks are terrifying booms, their movements faster and stronger than yours. Encounters with dogs are always tense, requiring quick thinking and access to an escape route, ideally something high up beyond their reach. Competition exists within your own kind, too. Other stray or semi-feral cats might try to muscle in on the tavern's resources. Territory disputes are resolved quickly and brutally, involving hissing, spitting, and sharp claws. You have the advantage of being established here, knowing the hiding spots and the rhythms of the place, but you must constantly defend your patch. It's a harsh pecking order, and showing weakness is not an option. A mainstream historical fact, Roman cities, including Rome itself, were incredibly crowded and lacked modern sanitation systems. Waste was often dumped into streets or overflowing cesspits, creating breeding grounds for pests and disease. This lack of hygiene meant that illnesses spread rapidly among the populace, especially in congested areas like the Suburra or the vicinities around busy taverns. Then there are the traps, not just for mice, but sometimes for larger pests. Snares, simple pitfalls, or even poisons laid out, carelessly placed, they are indiscriminate dangers for anything small and scavenging. You learn to identify suspicious objects, strange smells, areas humans seem keen to keep you out of. It requires a constant low-level vigilance, an instinctual distrust of the unfamiliar. A quirky tidbit: while Romans didn't keep cats primarily as pets, in the same way Egyptians did, there is archaeological evidence, like mosaics and inscriptions, suggesting some level of affection, or at least recognition for cats beyond just pest control. One mosaic depicts a cat catching a bird, possibly celebrating its hunting prowess, but another might show a cat lounging comfortably, it's not entirely clear-cut. And the ever-present threat of disease. Fleas are a given, a constant maddening itch you fight daily. But worse are the unseen dangers carried in the air, in the stagnant water, in the tainted scraps, a persistent cough, lethargy, eye infections. These are common ailments for animals like you, and there's no Roman vet clinic you can pop into. You rely on your own resilience, hoping your body can fight off whatever pathogens you encounter in this unsanitary world. Historians still argue whether Romans understood the mechanism of disease transmission, beyond vague ideas about bad air, miasma, or divine displeasure. They knew certain conditions were unhealthy, but the link between filth, pests, and specific illnesses wasn't grasped in the way we understand it today. So yes, the tavern provides food and shelter, a sort of anchor in the urban storm. But it's a fragile security, constantly buffeted by the waves of human chaos, animal competition, and environmental hazards. Every day is a series of calculated risks, of split-second decisions between pursuit and retreat, safety and hunger. Life inside the tavern, for all its unpredictability and lurking dangers, is a known quantity. It's a box, albeit a noisy, smelly, often perilous box, but you know its corners, its rhythms, its worst inhabitants. But step outside those swinging doors, beyond the threshold worn smooth by countless sandals and boots, and you enter a world that is both vast and terrifyingly indifferent. The street is a different kind of beast altogether, a chaotic river of humanity, animals, and wheeled contraptions that shows no mercy to the small and slow. Curiosity, or perhaps just the restless energy that builds up after hours confined indoors, sometimes draws you out. Maybe you chase a particularly bold mouse that darts under the door, or the scent of something promising drifts in on the breeze. Whatever the reason, the moment you venture out, the sensory overload hits like a physical blow. The noise isn't contained laughter and clinking amphorae, it's the roar of a city truly alive. The shouts of street vendors hawking their wares, hot beans, sausages, cheap wine, blend with the cries of labourers, the clatter of wagons on cobblestones, and the distant, mournful bray of a donkey. It's a symphony of chaos that makes the tavern seem like a quiet library in comparison. The smells change too. Instead of spilled wine and roasting meat, you get the sharp tang of urine from alleyways, the acrid smoke from blacksmiths' forges, the stench of overflowing drains, and the cloying sweetness of perfumes worn by wealthier passers-by. It's a richer, more complex, and often more offensive olfactory tapestry. But the real danger is the sheer volume and speed of movement. Roman streets, especially major thoroughfares or those near markets and public buildings, were incredibly congested. Imagine a modern rush hour but with no lanes, no traffic lights, and everyone basically making up the rules as they go along. Carts laden with goods rumble past, pulled by oxen or donkeys, their heavy wooden wheels indifferent to anything in their path. Litter bearers, carrying wealthy or infirm citizens in sedan chairs, expect everyone to get out of their way, often moving at a surprising clip. Horses trot and sometimes gallop, their hooves a constant threat. And then there are the sheer number of people, packed shoulder to shoulder, their feet a constant shuffling hazard. You have to be hyper-aware, a tiny eddy in this human current, constantly anticipating the next step, the next turn of a wheel, the sudden stop of a crowd. It's like navigating a stampede in slow motion, but you're the size of a particularly fluffy slipper. Scavenging on the street is a gamble. There might be discarded food, perhaps a dropped olive, a bit rusty bread, or the remnants of a picnic, but competition is fierce. Pigeons, scavenging dogs, and even other cats are vying for the same meagre resources. Unlike the tavern, where scraps, while unpredictable, are somewhat concentrated and relatively protected, street food is thinly spread and heavily contested. Exposure is another constant threat. The sturdy walls and roof of the tavern offer protection from rain, hail, and the biting cold winds of winter, or the oppressive heat of summer. Outside, you're at the mercy of the elements. A sudden downpour turns the street into a muddy, treacherous stream, forcing you to find a meagre shelter under awnings or in narrow doorways. The summer sun beats down mercilessly, heating the stones and making shade a precious commodity. There's no guaranteed warm hearth or cool corner outside. Mainstream historical fact, wheeled traffic, particularly heavy carts and wagons, was actually restricted in Rome during the daytime for much of the imperial period due to congestion. They were often only allowed entry at night, which would make nighttime on the streets a different, but still dangerous experience for a small animal. full of unseen ruts and fast-moving loads. Other animals are also different outside. While the tavern might have the occasional stray dog wander in, the streets are home to more numerous and often more desperate canines. Packs of semi-feral dogs roamed parts of the city, particularly the less affluent areas, and they viewed anything smaller than themselves as a potential prey or competition. A face-off with a single street dog is terrifying. Encountering a pack is almost a guaranteed death sentence. You develop an almost supernatural ability to detect the scent of a dog on the wind from remarkable distances. It's like your nose has a built-in nope function specifically for canines. Quirky tidbit. Romans had official dog catchers known as canarii, whose job was to round up stray dogs in the city, presumably to control their population and mitigate issues like rabies or aggression. This adds another layer of bureaucratic, if slightly terrifying, danger to street life for stray animals. The physical landscape outside is harsh. The cobblestones are hard and unforgiving, the walls are rough brick or stucco, offering little comfort. Hiding spots are fewer and farther between than the nooks and crannies of a building. Every doorway might belong to a human who will chase you away. Every dark alley could harbour a threat. Historians still argue whether the sheer density of the Roman population and its animal counterparts meant that disease spread more effectively animal to animal on the streets than it did within structures like taverns or homes. The constant interaction in the open versus slightly more confined spaces perhaps changed the dynamics. Compared to this brutal, indifferent expanse, the tavern, despite its flaws, feels almost like a sanctuary. It has its predictable cycles, its familiar dangers, its known sources of food and shelter. Outside, everything is amplified, less certain, more overtly hostile. It's a place you venture only out of necessity, a place that demands constant, exhausting vigilance. The warm, slightly stale air of the tavern, the distant clatter of dice, even the grumpy owner's footsteps, they all represent a kind of rough comfort after even a brief foray into the city's unforgiving arteries. You're a tavern cat because, frankly, the alternative is often far, far worse. It's the difference between living in a slightly leaky shed and just living in the rain. Returning from the sensory overload and physical gauntlet of the street back into the dim, smoky embrace of the tavern feels like slipping into a well-worn shoe. Even if that shoe is occasionally stompy and filled with sharp objects, the air inside, while thick with stale wine and sweat, is blessedly free from the unpredictable currents of the outside world. Here the dangers are familiar, mostly two-legged and loud and often fueled by fermented grape juice. The tavern is a magnet for all sorts of people, a melting pot of Roman society, albeit a rather grimy one. You see faces from every walk of life, though the truly wealthy rarely linger here. They have their own private dining rooms and fancy couches. No, this is the realm of the common folk. The labourers with their calloused hands, the merchants haggling over prices even after hours, the off-duty soldiers swapping war stories, the occasional gladiator basking in temporary fame, and plenty of just plain weary citizens looking for a cheap drink and some company. You learn to read them, not by their fancy togas or lack thereof, but by their posture, their voice, their smell, and most importantly the look in their eyes. Some are oblivious, completely absorbed in their conversations or their drinks, stepping over you without noticing you exist. Others are actively hostile, kicking out a foot or muttering curses if you get too close. These are the ones you give a wide berth, slinking away before they even register your presence as a nuisance. But then there are the good ones, the ones who notice you, the ones who offer a sympathetic glance, perhaps even a quiet word, the ones who bless their tired souls, drop a small piece of bread, a bit of discarded meat, or even a tiny splash of wine, which, trust me, is an acquired taste and not one you seek out often, unless you're desperate. These are the angels in this smoky purgatory. You learn their routines, their favourite tables, the times they're most likely to be generous. You develop a subtle dance around them, close enough to be seen and elicit pity or kindness, but far enough away not to be a pest, a fine line you walk with feline grace. A soldier might share a scrap of his military biscuit, dry as dust, but calories are calories. A merchant, flush with a good day's trade, might absent-mindedly toss you a piece of cheese rind. A regular patron, someone who sees you day after day, might even give you a gentle scratch behind the ears. A rare and precious moment of simple affection that makes the risks worthwhile. There's a whole substrata of life happening at foot level in the tavern. You navigate a forest of chair legs and sandalled feet, listening to the rumble of voices above, tracking crumbs, avoiding spills, and constantly assessing the emotional temperature of the room. A sudden roar of laughter can mean a spilled drink. A heated argument can mean flying fists and furniture. The clatter of dice can mean someone just lost their shirt and is probably in a foul mood. You become a furry barometer of the tavern's volatile atmosphere. Mainstream historical fact. Roman taverns, known as tabernae, especially those that also served food, thermopolia or popinae, were often seen by the Roman elite as disreputable places, frequented by the lower classes, slaves and foreigners. They were associated with drinking, gambling, and sometimes even prostitution, which is why you wouldn't typically find a senator grabbing a pint down here. You learn the specific habits of different patrons. The old man in the corner always drops crumbs from his bread. The group of young men playing dice are often too distracted to notice you stealing a discarded olive from under their table, but they can also be rowdier and more likely to kick if they do. The owner's favoured customers sometimes leave larger scraps, feeling entitled perhaps, or maybe just more careless with their food. One quirky tidbit is that some Roman gambling dens, which were often part of or adjacent to taverns, were places where people might make offerings or appeals to deities for luck. Imagine the prayers, the hopes, the desperation swirling around the dice table, and you're just trying to snag a rogue bit of sausage that rolled off onto the floor nearby. Your needs are much more immediate and less spiritual. You pray to the god of dropped food. Sometimes your presence is even factored into the human interactions. Gamblers might see you as a good or bad omen depending on whether you cross their path before a roll of the dice. Drunk patrons might try to pick you up or stumble over you. Children, if they are ever brought into this environment, might chase you or try to pet you too roughly. You have to be constantly ready to dart under a bench or behind a storage amphora. Historians still argue whether the social mixing that occurred in Roman taverns truly broke down class-bound barriers, or merely provided a temporary space where different strata tolerated each other out of necessity or convenience. From your perspective at floor level, the distinctions are less about class and more about who is likely to share food versus who is likely to kick you. The rich man might be just as likely to step on you as the poor man if he's not looking. It's a life of constant negotiation, a delicate balance between seeking sustenance and avoiding harm. The kindness you receive, though infrequent, is incredibly valuable. A tiny warmth in a world that is mostly indifferent or actively hostile. It reinforces the idea that for all its chaos, the tavern offers opportunities the sterile, dangerous street does not. It has its own unique ecosystem, and you are a small, adaptable predator and scavenger within it, relying on stealth, patience, and the occasional moment of human grace. You're not just surviving, you're learning the intricate social map of this noisy, intoxicating human world, one dropped crumb and avoided footstep at a time. The immediate dangers aren't always the obvious ones, like a dog or a cartwheel. Inside these walls, the threats are more nuanced, more human, and often smell strongly of cheap wine gone sour. Drunkenness is perhaps your biggest daily hazard. People, when they've had a few too many cups of Posca, that's sour wine mixed with water, basically the Gatorade of the working class, minus the refreshing electrolytes, become unpredictable. Their movements are clumsy, their tempers are short, and their awareness of small furry beings at floor level drops dramatically. You learn to spot the signs, the slurred speech, the overly loud laughter that suddenly cuts off, the way they lean precariously on tables or their equally inebriated companions. A weaving gait is your cue to get out of the way. A sudden lurch means you need to be 3 feet away before it happens. It's a constant game of spatial prediction, a furry, low-altitude air traffic control system where you are the sole aircraft desperately trying to avoid multiple incoming, wobbly human obstacles. They might stumble and kick out accidentally or on purpose. They might try to scoop you up with surprising speed, only to drop you just as quickly. They might try to feed you something entirely unsuitable, like a whole olive pit or, bless their hearts, another splash of Posca. Seriously, is that even safe for humans, let alone a cat? Your best defense is distance and speed. See a pair of sandals moving erratically, vanish under the nearest bench, hear a sudden, loud argument erupting, find the darkest corner and make yourself invisible. Gambling adds another layer of volatility. The clatter of the dice, usually thrown onto a small board or even just the floor, is a frequent sound. The stakes can be anything from small copper coins to personal belongings, and the moods of the players swing wildly with their fortunes. One moment there's triumphant shouting and backslapping as someone wins big. The next, there's frustrated cursing, table pounding, and accusations of cheating. These emotional extremes are dangerous. A man who's just lost his week's wages isn't going to be in the mood for a cat underfoot. He might lash out, kick a stool, or worse. Conversely, someone who's just won might be expansive and generous, but also more likely to celebrate with physical exuberance that could involve stepping on you. You learn to gauge the temperature of the dice game. A quiet game is probably safe. A loud one, whether with joy or anger, requires caution. You mostly stick to the periphery when the gambling is intense, waiting for the emotional storm to pass before venturing back towards the table for potential dropped snacks. Mainstream historical fact: gambling was officially frowned upon in Roman society, with laws attempting to restrict it, particularly for larger sums. However, in practice, it was incredibly popular across all social classes, especially in places like taverns and popinae. The emperors themselves were known to gamble despite the laws. It's like the Roman version of everyone saying they don't text and drive while totally texting and driving. Fights, thankfully, aren't an hourly occurrence, but they happen often enough to be a significant risk. Misunderstandings fueled by drink, disagreements over politics or gambling debts, or just plain bad attitudes can escalate quickly. Voices rise, insults fly, furniture gets shoved, and sometimes fists start swinging. When a brawl erupts, the tavern transforms from a chaotic but mostly manageable space into a free-for-all zone of flailing limbs and flying objects. Your survival instinct takes over immediately. You become a furry projectile, launching yourself under the sturdiest piece of furniture or towards a dark corner, your heart hammering against your ribs. The noise is deafening: shouts, grunts, the crash of pottery or wooden stools, the thud of bodies hitting the floor. You stay hidden until the sounds of violence subside, until the owner or other patrons manage to break it up, or until someone is dragged out into the street. Then cautiously you emerge, ready to scavenge any fallen crumbs but acutely aware of the lingering tension in the air. A fight changes the atmosphere for a while, leaving behind an uneasy quiet or grumbling resentment. One quirky tidbit about these establishments is the sheer variety of food items that might have been served, from simple lentils and bread to sausages, cheese, and even roasted meats, depending on the pepina. While you're focused on scavenging, the air is often thick with the smell of whatever's cooking, a tantalizing mix that you usually only experience in tantalizing whiffs before it's gone, usually into a human stomach. Still, those smells guide your scavenging path through the floor-level debris. Historians still argue whether these tavern brawls were a symptom of genuine social unrest among the lower classes, or simply the inevitable result of mixing alcohol, gambling, and crowded conditions. Whatever the cause, they were a reality of life in these places, and for a cat they represented a clear and present danger of being collateral damage in a very human conflict. You don't care about the socio-political implications, you just want to avoid getting stepped on by a sandal-clad foot mid-swing. Navigating the tavern is a constant assessment of risk and reward. Is that dropped a piece of sausage big enough to be worth the risk of getting too close to the rowdy group celebrating a dice win? Is the old woman sleeping in her corner chair likely to kick in her sleep? It's a dynamic environment, always shifting, always demanding your full attention. You become incredibly attuned to the subtle cues of human behavior, reading postures, facial expressions at ankle level, and the tone of voices like it's your primary form of literacy. It's a tough school, but you're getting a master's degree in Roman street smarts and tavern savvy, and honestly, it beats trying to catch pigeons outside. Life in the tavern, as you know intimately by now, is a perpetual tightrope walk between feast and famine, comfort and crushing danger. But even this demanding existence has its limits, and you feel them creeping in, subtle at first, then undeniable. The nooks you used to squeeze into with ease now feel a little tighter. The jump onto the counter requires a fraction more effort, a deeper crouch, a moment of hesitation your younger self wouldn't have known. Your naps, already frequent, become longer, deeper, less easily disturbed by the clang of a dropped amphora. Lingering threats don't disappear, but their nature shifts. The threat isn't just the immediate boot or the spilled hot grease. It's the slow grind. It's the perpetual damp, the unavoidable fleas, a constant maddening annoyance you spend hours grooming away, only for them to return like tiny bloodthirsty tax collectors. The occasional chill that settles deep in your bones during the colder months. It's the accumulated weariness of always being on alert, always scanning, always reacting. Your whiskers might droop a little lower, your tail swish a little slower. You've survived puppyhood, adolescence, and the peak of your tavern prowess. Now you feel the distinct pull towards something different, something softer. The endless cycle of scavenging, avoiding drunken patrons, and chasing the occasional brave mouse who seems to be mocking your slowing reflexes starts to lose its appeal. The noise, which you once navigated with agile cunning, now sometimes just feels loud. The tavern owner, your reluctant benefactor, is getting older too. His temper is shorter, his patience thinner. You notice him watching you sometimes, a look in his eye you can't quite read. Is it affection, resignation, annoyance at another creature taking up space and demanding scraps? You're not sure, but the unspoken question hangs in the smoky air. How much longer can this arrangement last? This period brings a growing hope for easier living. Maybe one of the regulars, the quiet baker who always leaves a few scraps outside his shop, or the kind woman who sells flowers and sometimes pets you gently behind the ears, will take pity. You've seen other tavern cats disappear, sometimes suddenly, sometimes gradually. You hope your exit, when it comes, is a gentle transition, not a harsh expulsion into the even more perilous street. Imagine it, a small dry corner that's yours, not just borrowed space, a bowl that gets filled consistently, not just by chance or successful begging, sunlight streaming onto a warm patch of floor that you don't have to share or defend, fewer feet to dodge, fewer loud voices to startle you awake. A life where the primary challenge is batting at a dust motes or finding the perfect napping spot rather than tactical survival. Historians still argue whether the concept of keeping cats primarily as pets, rather than just working mousers, was widespread in Roman society or limited to the wealthy elite. While the rich certainly had pampered animals, the presence of cats in places like taverns suggests that their practical value was the main reason for their tolerance among ordinary Romans. You, however, dream of being someone's spoiled little prince or princess, as the case may be, regardless of social class. A quirky tidbit: Romans actually had various terms for cats, including feles, general term for small felines, sometimes including wild cats or ferrets, and later borrowed terms from Greek like katus. The modern word cat likely derives from this later usage, a linguistic echo of your Roman ancestors. So you're literally part of a long Roman legacy, even if you just think of yourself as, well, you. This hope for a quiet retirement isn't just a fantasy. It's a palpable desire that shapes your actions. You spend less time asserting dominance over other potential scavengers, if any dare challenge you at your age, and more time seeking out the calmer corners, the less frequented tables. You might even follow that kind flower seller a little further than usual when she leaves, testing the waters, wondering if her home might be the peaceful haven you crave. Mainstream historical fact, retirement in the modern sense didn't exist for most working-class Romans. They typically continued to work as long as they were able. However, for those with some savings or supportive family, or perhaps for favoured animals like a loyal guard dog or effective mouser, a less demanding final phase of life was possible. You're hoping to fall into that favoured animal category. The final section of your life story isn't about grand battles or daring escapes. It's about finding peace. It's about the subtle slowing down, the shift in priorities from survival to comfort, from chaos to calm. It's about hoping that after years of providing valuable, if unsung service as a rodent control specialist and accidental tavern mascot, you've earned a little quiet corner of the world to call your own, away from the spilled venom and the clatter of dice. Your watch is almost over, little feline friend. The noises of the tavern begin to fade, becoming less urgent, less important. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into the final moments of tonight's journey together. As we leave the smoky, noisy, unpredictable world of the Roman tavern and the weary but still hopeful cat who called it home, the sounds begin to soften. The clatter of sandals on stone, the murmur of distant voices, the faint lingering scent of something frying. They all seem to recede, like waves pulling back from the shore. The darkness feels deeper now, more still. The cat, wherever it ended up, found its quiet place, a spot of warmth where the only pressing duty was to feel the sun on its fur and perhaps dream of chasing phantom mice in fields of poppies. The worries of the day, the dangers, the constant vigilance can all melt away now. There's only the gentle quiet, the fading light, and the soft rhythm of your own breathing. Just relax, let go, and drift. And